Roanoke Gaming has a new video, and I've been waiting for this one forever, actually. The Las Plagas Parasite Resident Evil 4 Remake, Definitive Lore Edition. Now, the reason that Roanoke Gaming hasn't had a Las Plagas video before, reason he hasn't explained the Ganados, anything like that, is because he was waiting for the remake. And I saw this go live, and I waited specifically for this. Roanoke, you absolute legend. Love your videos. And I'm curious if we're going to start with the feed again. I'm waiting for this. This is going to be great.
Over the course of this channel's lifespan, I've gotten several comments on one specific franchise that I just refused to cover for like a singular reason.
Yeah.
Because a better, more clear version was dropping in just a few years, and I resolved that if my channel was still around by then, and by the time it actually came out, I would come back and hit it hard, and that time is finally upon us.
And might I say, as representative of the Kaiju Kip community, I'm glad you're still around. Love your science videos, absolutely. I am not a microbiologist. I do not have any sort of degrees in biology or anything like that. Find your videos absolutely enlightening. Hope to see you one day and potentially work with you, because your content is right up my alley.
I don't think you really understand what this game means to me. Arguably, Dead Space was the catalyst for this
Yes,
channel,
I have.
But Resident Evil 4 was literally the catalyst.
I might react
for Dead
to some
Space.
stuff on that.
It's basically the same thing for me.
Yeah, it was.
Take as many times as I've played through Dead Space and double it, and that's how many times that I would just go through this game a year.
Yeah!
The story, the giant escort mission, that wasn't really as horrible as you might always think, because you could just throw her in a dumpster, and the close quarters combat that somehow always resulted in Leon's neck and spinal cord getting some fresh air.
Yeah.
This game is just an absolute masterpiece. As I began covering the Gigantes, remember when I called
The fucking Oleg High, like, it just looks like a Mordor troll, right? It just looks like it.
all them Gigantes? It made like a lot of people salty. I know they're Gigantes. Anyways, I would then go on to cover the Regenerators before I realized a remaster was going to drop, which I did not see coming at all. Both of those will actually get a remaster, much like with my Dead Space breakdowns, with more biological information and better visuals. But this is why I did like a full stop on Resident Evil 4 as I waited for the remaster to finally come out. And as I say this, it looks like I've already got around 50 gigabytes out of the 67 downloaded, so I think it's time we get back into the world of unsteady breathing, stabby tails descending through the roof skewering you, the edgelord Salazar, who I called...
He does have yellow eyes, actually. Interesting.
Actually, a sorority girl, all 4 years of knowing her at every party I saw her at, Salazar. But one time she finally asked me what I meant, and I explained it to her. I don't think she got it, but
Nope.
oh well.
Dr. Cox, yes!
This glorious infection of a game, the Resident Evil 4 Remake. But before getting to that, as always, thank you guys for watching this channel and supporting this content. I've been doubling up on videos recently between Roanoke Tales and Roanoke Gaming, so it's been a little tiring.
Yeah,
but with all the
I believe it.
engagements you guys are giving it, it does make it worth it. So thank you, but let's get to it. So, as a microbiologist, I have several interests, but typically my main focus is the discussion of the pathophysiology of a disease.
Yeah.
While the disease itself is horrible, and I'm actually a bit of a hypochondriac, I'm a firm believer to know your enemy. The way a disease presents itself, how the body successfully fights back or fails to do so, what may be destroyed in the process of engaging in this micro-war, and ultimately, what is the outcome are things that are highly interesting as it shows a finely tuned process that has been cultivated through time, with those who deviated outside the lines having either met their end or potentially, if lucky enough, finding that they stood while others with a more standard reaction fell.
I mean, knowing what you're dealing with is paramount in anything. I mean, from a medical standpoint, talking with people who are medical, I know people who are in medical field. Like, it helps to know what you're going against. I was of the group when I was in middle school, you know, going to the computer library before school every day. I was playing Pandemic, right? Back when it was a Flash game. You go in your browser and play it on the school computer, right? It's just the kind of person I've been, and you learn a lot of things from it. Okay, it's got a high infectivity rate, right? You know, it can transmit to a lot of people, but is it necessarily the most lethal? Or is it going to be something like Ebola that has a high transmission rate? You can technically quarantine it, and it can burn itself out, but it has an extremely high lethality rate. Are you looking at something that's incredibly lethal, but transmission rate is going to be incredibly low? Like, there's a number of things that you just have to consider. So hence, I guess, why this content is... And not that I was like a troubled kid or anything like that. It just made sense to me. And then I realized that the easy mode, where people sneezed in their hands, didn't wash their hands, and hugged each other while sick, I realized that was less of a joke and more reality, and that actually gave me depression.
You never know what you're going to get when it comes to your genetics and dealing with foreign bodies.
No.
Bacterial diseases are of particular interest to me, and what I am the most experienced in concerning lab background.
Bacteria are
education, branching
wild.
into virology as well. However, there is one type of infection that I have always found to be the most mentally interesting
Parasites.
and horrifying.
Yep.
Since I was a kid and first heard about the fact that you could get an amoeba up your nose that would then go on to eat your brain,
Yeah.
I knew this planet was truly cursed. A living cell entering another cluster of living cells and wreaking havoc in a way that results in the end of that host.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything more panic-inducing? And not only that, in some ways, these animals can end up controlling the host as well.
Yep.
They will quite literally engineer their end in just the way they want.
Yep.
These are known as parasites. Their
Yep.
only goal, much like all of life on this planet, is survival. However, instead of being a prokaryote and trying to divide and use up resources, we, have antibiotics or your immune system that can handle those.
Right.
Or a virus that your body has specifically adapted to that will then tell cells that are producing said virus to pop and control the infection. Parasites are unlike these two things and are exceedingly difficult to get rid of, which I'm required by myself to tell you concerning bacteria specifically. We're also on the verge of no longer being able to treat gonorrhea as...
Really? Oh, fuck. Yeah, no, and to be fair, people do inject themselves with parasites willingly. There is and I cannot condone this, I cannot support this, please do not do this for health reasons. Please do your research. There is a diet, if you will, that you actually gain a tapeworm. And you're supposed to lose a lot of weight from it, but you have a tapeworm in your intestines. They're notoriously hard to get rid of because they can regenerate from just a couple segments, right? Like, they're actually fucking wild. Let's not do that. Parasites are fucking wild. I mean, like, in your body, yes, has antibodies, and they can attempt to evict the parasite, if you will. Parasites are just so fucking weird, though, and parasitism has always been something that has fascinated me. No, cordyceps are not parasites, if anyone was wondering. No, that is a fungi, fungi are weird, man. They're great. Tapeworm shot? I have not, and that sounds awful.
It's becoming antibiotic resistant to our stronger antibiotics, so remember that. And for the love of God, stop flushing your antibiotics down the drains and just finish your course of them to make sure the bacteria for your infection is destroyed. Unless you want to create a stronger version of that bacteria.
Yeah, if you are prescribed X antibiotics, see it through unless you talk to your doctor and your doctor okays it. Like, please consult your physician before doing that, because you could not have run that course out. Roanoke's completely right.
Off topic, I know, but information is power, baby.
Yes,
okay,
it is.
So, where were we? Yes, parasites.
Yes,
parasites
it's Slave Moisture!
are a different animal entirely. See, the human body is only okay at dealing with and destroying these parasites. In some ways, we can clear the infection quickly and without issue. But in most ways, this is not the case, and there are several reasons for this. When you are infected with a parasite, clearing it is in no way assured. In fact, there are many people who have malaria for the rest of their lives because they do not have access to treatments.
Wow.
These adaptations to this parasite are also equally interesting from a human perspective. There is something known as sickle cell, and it is a genetic mutation that arose from the presence of malaria.
Really?
Those that actually had the genetics that will create sickle cell would be able to deal with the infection much more effectively.
Interesting.
Typically associated with those who have family ties to Africa, this causes the red blood cell to actually change its skeletal, or at least bolster its skeletal shape into that of like a sickle if it has two copies of the genetic coding as opposed to one.
I think it affects oxygen flow, if I remember correctly, but I'm sure he's going to get into that.
So in those people who have the circular shape that we typically associate with RBCs will have one copy, whereas if you have the two copies, it will be sickle cell. This is because malaria is endemic to this region, and those that possessed this trait would have an essential part of their cell resistant, but not likely in the way that you think.
Right.
Actin within red blood cells is what gives the cell its shape. When infected by the malaria parasite, those that have sickle cell would be resistant to the changes that the parasite would try to impose on the red blood cell.
Does it blur the line, Miguel? I was always under the assumption that it was a cordyceps fungus. I could be wrong, though. And would absolutely love citation otherwise. Absolutely love citation. I know you're joking, Gotcha, but unfortunately people do think that way.
Those who do not have the sickle cell trait will then have their red blood cells basically become altered and become sticky and attached to blood vessel walls, which causes inflammation. Because the parasite cannot change the actin structure in those who have the sickle cell trait, it decreases the symptoms of the parasitic infection, thus making this an advantageous trait. Now, the issue arises when both parents have the sickle cell trait, and they pass it along like those gene copies, and they both code for it. Having one gene from, say, like your mother, who has normal hemoglobin structure genes, and then from your father, who has this perfectly viable condition that establishes you as more resistant to malaria, I mean, everything's good. But with both genes coding for the sickle cell, this leads to many issues like anemia, blood vessel destruction through blood clots,
that's what I'm thinking
strokes,
of.
heart attacks, and everything that comes with it because of how the cells themselves are shaped. They'll basically latch onto each other and create these clots.
Yeah.
So you're probably wondering to yourself, what does this have to do with Resident Evil 4?
Everything actually has a lot to do with it. And like, I mean, getting into the topic of, can I even say it on YouTube? The topic of incest, right? Like from a medical standpoint, it is bad because if you have so when offspring is made, right? You're taking, parent A and parent B, right? And you're taking both genetics and you're mashing them together effectively, right? However, if parent A and parent B are too similar, you're trying to pull two very similar genetics into one copy, right? The offspring, right? And it doubles up a lot, and therefore you error 404 on a lot of things. Is the gist of it? Obviously, a medical professional, someone educated more on the subject, could explain it in a lot more detail, but that's the basic gist. It causes a lot of the issues that it does because of repeating genes that it can't pull from more. It has a limited amount that it can pull from, thus it runs into issues because it's trying to combine these two like things. And yeah, so that's exactly what's going on with sickle cell there, in that if both are coded for sickle cell, the offspring is going to run into issues because, for 404, it's going to run into issues.
People who have been here longer know that this is basically just a science channel in a trench coat selling you video game breakdowns.
Yes!
And then trying to make you learn the Chad science of biology. Wrapping up the malaria connection, the point is, parasites can inspire changes in your body, which can result in things that are good in some aspects, but outside of that specific scenario, it can actually be quite detrimental to your survival.
Starting with a
Enter the Las Plagas.
Man, I hope.
This parasitic disease not only takes over the host of the body completely, and in some ways destroys it to protect itself from attack, but will influence and alter the actions of the person to a degree that will have you wonder if they are actually still in there or not. So let's start from the beginning on this parasite, and then move into why the body cannot just simply rid itself of the Las Plagas on the immunological front, and then get into how it is able to accomplish what it actually does to the human body concerning domination and mutations. Nice to be back into Resident Evil 4. So, to start with a little bit of history for those that are not familiar with the parasite. The idea initially, since you are in the mountains of Spain, is that, it must be endemic to this location, given that, it's here, and it appears to have been trapped here for quite some time. But this isn't necessarily true. The Las Plagas parasite, also known as the Plagues, actually appears to be a species that may have its evolutionary history based in West Africa. Okay, likely to brutalize this name, but within the Paya Kingdom, there were some ruins that the organism was located.
Oh, is this talking about the Resident Evil 5 ruins with the flower the progenitor virus came from? Is that what we're going on about?
They believe that it actually dated back to the Neolithic age, where in layman's terms means around 4300 BC to 2000 BC.
Wow.
But clearly, for this species to evolve, it was always in this area. Humanity just happened across it at this point. It appears that it may have jumped continents around the Bronze Age and ended up in Spain during this time frame. Now, anyone who knows about the Bronze Age, it's sort of an odd time because everything appears to have just been coming up Millhouse for humanity as we continued working and thriving, but then all at once, the age collapsed, and we to this day don't really 100% know what happened.
That's later,
There just doesn't appear to be a lot of leftover evidence. One hypothesis that is raised is that there was a massive flood around this time, which is why nobody could just sit around and write about what was happening.
I've heard this theory.
People were wiped out all at once.
I've heard this.
Because you got to remember, around then, all the big trading ports were just that. They were ports. They would be around water. Anybody who wasn't around there likely was not really that involved in the bronze trade and wasn't as a developed area. So what appears to have maybe happened is that, again, there's, like, in every culture, there appears to be a story of a great flood around this time frame, biblical or not. It appears that there may be some truth to it. And this is because they think that possibly, I think it was either the Black Sea or the Mediterranean, I can't remember specifically which, but they think an asteroid or basically a meteorite or something may have impacted it, basically wiping out all the civilizations around in this area. But we as a species just have large portions of our history wiped out by catastrophe, which is pretty normal. They say back in the day, there were around 2,000 humans left, and we were confined to the coast of Africa because there was a big issue. I believe it was with energy reaching the planet, so there was a mass die-off. Hopefully, we don't end up doing that to ourselves with nukes, but you just never know. The world's getting a little crazy out there.
Kimmy boy jump scare.
Anyhow, as the Bronze Age collapsed, the parasite would remain within Spain for some time as society would then rebuild back to a degree. The Spaniards in this area that housed the Las Plagas would find themselves also being infected by the parasite, and then a pushback like thousands of years later would begin.
Yeah.
A man by the name of Salazar would launch a campaign against those who were intentionally being infected with the parasite known as the Ganados. The Ganados held the parasites, or the parasite in general, in high regard as they performed sacrifices to it.
Yeah.
This crusade would ultimately be successful as the Plagas would be driven underground inside of the caves of the mountains and then sealed away. Understanding the danger this parasite posed to his people, where the parasite was sealed, a fortress would then be built on top of it to keep all curious individuals away.
Right.
Salazar would then pass
Salazar's
the title to his
castle.
offspring to maintain the fortress and continue to keep this parasite secure underground. However, things would not go well roughly 1,000 years in the future. I mean, imagine someone caring about what you care about right now 1,000 years in the future. It's not likely.
It's
we'll
not
probably
human.
be back to hunting with spears if Einstein was right about us fighting World War IV with rocks and spears. Anyways,
Pretty
a
sure
man
that
by
was
the
World
name
War
of Osmond
III.
Sadler, which, by the way, I do have to say, we're kind of getting into some spoilers at this point, but at the end of the day, this is a remake, and the game has been out for 18 years.
Mate, it's an old
Do you
game.
feel old yet? Because I do. Moving on, Sadler would come into contact with Ramon Salazar and essentially convince him his family was wrong for imprisoning the Las Plagas.
Yeah.
Sadler would offer Salazar a high position in the cult if he would help him release the parasite to form the Los Illuminados, or the Enlightened Ones. So Salazar, being the punk that he is, would agree, as the digging would then continue for the Las Plagas, and this would basically kind of dishearten everybody. At first, it appeared that the parasite was donezo. As they went into the caves and began looking for it, they would find body after body of the parasite,
It might be that gotcha,
but not any living. That was until villagers began to exhibit strange symptoms. It became clear that while the oxygen-starved caves didn't keep the adult Las Plagas alive, they had entered a spore form of their life cycle that did not require the same constraints that allowed them to enter the lungs of the villagers after that and begin the infection process.
Right.
This would make Sadler exceedingly happy, as this meant now the rest of the tests could begin. Building a military complex on top of some ancient ruins on a nearby island, they would begin studying the plaga, because if you didn't know your enemy, it could get out of hand. Quite the concept.
Yep.
We should apply that in life. But through the studies of this parasite, they learned several things about them. To start, the parasite itself is an arthropod, which means it's an incredibly old species. The species of parasite has likely been infecting animals that are in West Africa with surprising regularity, but because they are just typical animals, the main outcome would just be a potentially higher aggression level, which is difficult to determine in a species unless outward presentation of symptoms indicate why it is actually being more aggressive. But therein lies the nefariousness of the Las Plagas, as they do not force outward symptoms to appear during the day, unless it's, like, again, another form of mutation. But by then, you likely already know that something is wrong with this animal.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at the dogs, right? The Comio from Resident Evil 4 Remake. Like, that's not what a dog looks like. Like, this is a caricature of a dog, right? You look at it and you're like, oh, that's a dog. But, I mean, clearly the teeth have elongated. The canines, right? Incredibly elongated, probably reinforced as well. So, I mean, growth has happened here. Eyes being blood red. I mean, like, the matted fur, it arguably is larger than a dog, right? This is outward expression of modification from the plaga that could theoretically suffice during the day. However, there is still going to be photosensitivity issues.
Like with the dogs, for instance, we definitely see something is wrong with them. But this is also the issue with humans being infected. Aggression will rise under certain situations, but while interacting day to day, they do not appear as if anything is wrong.
I'd be
The
very
Las Plagas
curious about that too,
present in
gotcha.
a few different ways. As Sadler continued his work and the study at the military complex island, it became apparent that there were a few strands that I guess you could say were, their own little lineages. One strand
Dominant.
may have a queen, and the rest down line from her would be subservient to her influence. Utilizing this means once an infected person was infected, they too would become subservient to those that are upstream to them, as Sadler and Salazar would find themselves higher at the top.
Right.
However, other individuals would also be dominant, making their own lines. If one Ganado was infected with another dominant individual of Las Plagas, they would form their own line and may serve as an interference to Sadler's line.
Yeah.
Because of this realization, not everyone was infected with Las Plagas.
No,
and
it was
only a few
controlled.
were chosen specifically to receive them. Salazar and Mendez, the priest, were infected, to which Mendez would then go on to infect others through his church, where, again, he was a priest. With the local population subdued, they served as a lookout to report to Salazar and, ultimately, Sadler, keeping an eye on the local law enforcement and foreign agents. As this issue continued to grow, eventually it would catch the eye of the United States government. USA, baby! More so after a man named Krauser got involved with the Los Illuminados. Krauser, belonging to the Hive or Host Capture Force, or just HCF for short, was dispatched to the area to determine what was going on with a man by the name of Louis Serra being completely separate. Krauser was basically trying to prove that he was loyal to Sadler so that he could conduct his mission and research, who would then go on to abduct Ashley Graham, or the president's daughter, in order to get closer. However, Sadler was not really an idiot and knew that this Krauser guy was up to something from the beginning, because
Krauser was sus.
It's literally said in the game that he's American and that he wouldn't trust him. Anyway, so Krauser was then infected.
He's kind of combining both the remake and the original, which technically you could theoretically do this. There were talkings in the original where Sadler, for example, was on the Metal Gear Solid comm with Leon, right? And he's just like, oh, you think I would ever trust an American, right? It wasn't said in the remake. There's actually differences between the remake and the original. There are certain things in the remake that are missing in the original. Shoot Krauser after you kill him. You can't really. That's interesting. So I think he's combining a little bit of the two here, which a lot of it could be seen as supplementary, kind of like Dead Space and Dead Space Remake, where, yes, they do different things, but you could view them as complementary if you wanted to.
Did with the dominant form of Plaga, which is interesting why they wouldn't want him controlled, but this may have been more of a mistake, and Sadler didn't know that there were dominant forms yet. After this, he became the turd in the punch bowl for all sides, as Ada Wong was then sent out to continue the investigation by the rival company, which is a rival to Umbrella. What a name. While this was happening, obviously the president would be rather upset about his daughter getting captured, so the absolute unit known as Leon Kennedy would then be dispatched to rescue her, getting caught in the crossfire between the Los Illuminados, the rival company, and Krauser just absolutely losing it and taking you out 40 times in a row to even survive the encounter with him due to quick time events that give you 4 milliseconds to complete. Like, it wasn't enough.
Yeah, it's
All
not.
I can say is if you had a few beers, when you get to this part of the game, just put the controller down and go do something else.
First time through, it's rough.
Not have a reaction time to complete this fight.
No.
But this brings up where we are now, which is now like everybody's favorite portion. At least it's my favorite portion because
defeat.
Why I made this channel. The actual pathophysiology of the Las Plagas. So the actual Las Plagas, as we have discussed a little bit already, but just as a refresher, since we've gotten further along in the video, like 16 minutes. It's an arthropod that is capable of infecting animals and controlling them in a much more hands-on way. Assumedly, this species hails from West Africa and came into being a long time ago. After making its way over to Spain during the Bronze Age through the trade brought on by humanity's, time frame here,
right.
A local group would assumedly begin worshiping the parasite in some capacity, though they didn't know it was just a literal animal that they were giving themselves over to. Which you have to ask yourself, why would an animal be worth worshiping? I mean, a parasite, because I'm aware, some animals...
Bro, I'm literally just an arthropod. Why are you calling me God? To be fair, we shitpost about it in modern day, right? Like, we all say, reject modernity, become crab, because everything in the ocean evolves into crabs. I mean, it's very human, though. Oh, God, Predator species of Plaga. Oh, God, I don't know. Be very interested in that. I think they get a little weird in terms of parasites in the food chain. I'd have to delve into it.
Animals are considered sacred in some cultures out there, but
yeah.
This one just seems rather odd.
It's a cult.
Once the parasite began spreading through the pagan worshippers, they were eventually subdued by Salazar and his family, and then they were put in charge of stopping the escape of this creature out into the world. That was until the 8th generation led to this absolute nerd known as Ramon, which, my God, if you thought he was creepy looking in the original, look how they massacred my boy in the remake.
Remake, hold my beer.
Though, because something about the white eyelashes is just massively disturbing. God! Horrific reveals that basically just show European royalty that my freedom brain refuses to acknowledge aside. The parasite would be desiccated and devoid of life, but some had entered the spore stage in order to survive in the harsh environments, which you can actually see in life forms from time to time. Bacteria, for instance, has a spore stage that when the environment has become exceedingly difficult to survive in and it's not assured, entering this stage, the spore can last where we thought maybe only 10,000 years or so, but nature likes to prank humanity, so the oldest one that we were actually able to revive is about 25 to 30 million years old. These spores can also withstand more than just time. Once entering the spore stage, their metabolism stops. I mean, it's completely they're just a packet of genetic material at this point that then can be carried into the stratosphere before raining back down on the other side of the planet.
Interesting.
Now, a single-cell organism is different from a multicellular one, such as with the Las Plagas.
Yes, very.
Regardless, the spore stage appears to be quite sustainable for existing in environments your more active form cannot. Also, what's interesting about bacteria is the endospore stage, they're just, again, fundamentally packets of genetic information that allows for the bacteria to wake back up and begin dividing. Sort of reminds me of a virus somewhat, being just another packet of information.
I mean,
it doesn't really appear to be alive or dead.
Yeah.
Because we actually still aren't 100% sure where viruses originally come from.
I thought we had settled that debate, actually. Didn't we? I thought we confirmed that technically it falls under living because of certain the modern definitions that we had. Like, yes, it's a bit of an anomaly, but by every definition, technically, if I understand it correctly, it was living. I'd have to see a peer-reviewed paper on it, though.
As of now, everything else makes sense except for them. There's gonna be someone that's like, actually, it's been proven. No, it hasn't. It has not been proven where viruses come from yet. We're close.
I stand corrected.
Close to figuring it out and putting that final nail in the coffin, but we still, without any doubt, can say where they've come from.
Once again, if there's a peer-reviewed paper out there, I'm all for reading it.
My money, depending like how weird they are.
Speaking of spores, and on that subject, you are correct. Spores are incredibly hard. Anthrax is fucked. Or all 7, even though the ground is bleached, stuff like that, right? Oh, there's still anthrax there. Let's be real. Or else 7 in the former Soviet Union. Still anthrax there. It's gonna last for a fucking long time. Spores of anything is fucked.
Whether originating here or somewhere else is kind of irrelevant, but it would be interesting if they did come from, not Earth.
Space.
Anyways, moving on.
Dead space.
The Las Plagas
Got 'em.
infection process, once entering the spore stage, allowed it to enter through the lungs, where it would burrow through the lung tissue, which may cause you to cough up blood. For Leon and Ashley, however, this was not the reason that they are expelling blood. This has more to do with the attachment site than anything.
Yeah.
It does appear, though, that there is some lung damage based on where it is.
Yeah.
Once moving through the lungs, on the gonados specifically, when they were infected, it would then be in the thoracic cavity, where it would attach to the spinal cord of the person right next to the heart.
Yep.
Seemingly drawn to the nervous system of the host, this would allow it to also control the host's actions physically, but alter them mentally during these controlled events and subsequent host-controlled events as well, like a subtle influence while the host was back in the driver's seat. However, this would require the growth of the parasite to actually begin exhibiting these symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
The first portion of the infection, however, involves the aforementioned attachment and then the integration into the spinal cord, but more as a mass on the side of it. This is intensely painful for the host and can make them pass out during the process, as when Leon passes out after his fight with the lake monster. This would be the moment the parasite went from the larval form, and the egg, I suppose the best way to put it, to the adolescent form.
Yeah.
Once this happens, your immune system would begin going haywire.
Yep.
But therein lies the issue for your body as to why you cannot just clear this infection.
Nope.
So let's get into some immunological functions, because that's what some of us are here for, and then we can move back into the infection process. You, right there, listening, as an animal, suck at getting rid of parasites.
Fact.
We sort of touched on this earlier with malaria, and without treatment, well, you're kind of screwed, my friend. But because of our big brainy brains, we have begun to basically pick up the slack where our bodies fail. But it's not necessarily our body's fault either. Parasites are difficult things to get rid of.
Yes, very.
In general, because it's an entire animal in most cases, and it's difficult for your body to find, subdue, and destroy it. But that's not going to stop it from trying. The first advantage, though, a parasite has against your body is it can usually outrun your immune response.
Yep.
We have seen some types of worms that, when they start to get attacked by the immune system, they will simply move to another area, making your immune system have to try to find them once more. Another advantage is some parasites will actually start, like, the process of getting attacked. They will just shed their outer lining as the immune system was attached and actively attacking that, and then they'll just continue on like nothing happened. And if they start getting attacked again, they just shed that lining too.
Yep.
Others are just outright too large and have too thick of coatings on their body to effectively dissolve through before the parasite knows it's under attack and then runs away.
Nature knows being thick is superior. Got 'em.
And even still others are actually just... It sucks, but they're useful in some ways by what they do, which also helps them survive in our bodies. Now, a lot of you probably remember this fact that I've told you, but for all new people, parasites may yet play an important role in the regulation of your body. Have you ever wondered why first world countries have so many people with so many lethal allergies? Well, a reason might be we just do not have any parasites. Parasites, at least some, are known to actually calm the immune system activity by existing within hosts.
I didn't know that.
They release
Gotcha.
a chemical
Rough.
that will lead to a calmer immune system at large, which means they will stop attacking them, but can also lead to the body to stop attacking itself in an autoimmune fashion. The thinking is because whenever the first world person gets a parasite, we obviously want to get rid of it.
Right.
Over time, this can lead to worsening allergies as the immune system gets more aggressive towards invaders, and what it sees as an invader, this can kind of lead to like harm to the host itself. So with this in mind, if we ever want to colonize another planet or just get off this rock in general, we're going to need to figure out how to replace the effects of parasites and how they have on our bodies so that we just don't bring a bunch of parasites to space with us and have to infect ourselves intentionally. We're going to have to find a medication that is going... I mean, honestly, gene therapy is really what's going to do it. CRISPR is the way...
CRISPR's a whole fucking rabbit hole. Some medical people I've talked to, like you mentioned CRISPR, and they just give you this look like, oh, God. Oh, God. I mean, obviously, like, you know, there's different professionals are going to have different views on CRISPR, right? CRISPR is the next step of human evolution. CRISPR is, quote-unquote, playing God. CRISPR is, you know, fooling with fire. CRISPR is bad. CRISPR is amazing. I mean, literally, there's going to be people across the spectrum talking about CRISPR. Like, it's going to be a topic that you could walk into a group of medical professionals and get differing answers and differing opinions of if it's good or not. Yeah, no, well, and so I wanted to bring up as well, the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, right? From my understanding, the mitochondria wasn't in ancient cells, right? Like, that was an addition later. So, coming back to this point, it's theoretically possible for a parasite or, you know, any sort of foreign body to be integrated into ourselves and over a long enough period of time to evolve, right? We could evolve with said parasite to be more of a symbiotic relationship than a parasitical relationship, or just have a foreign body inserted that does another job. That being said, we're looking large period of time in terms of evolution, and we might not know the full effects of it until down the line. But it just at least the mere thought experiment of the mitochondria. Well, yes, it is the powerhouse of the cell, being a originally foreign body to the cell, always fascinated me. And once again, if someone happens to have peer-reviewed papers that they want to send my way, I'm more than happy to go over them, because this greatly fascinates me as someone that, like, grew up with Resident Evil and at one point was like, man, I would love to go into biochemical engineering or just bioengineering, but I don't like math.
Way forward. For every other thing on this planet, no free rides. You know, we've had to contend with parasites as a species since the dawn of our species.
Yes.
So we've kind of adapted to it. But anyhow, this functionality and coexisting is unsurprisingly beneficial for both and necessary because, again, let's be real here, as much as you hate the idea of another animal getting a free ride by eating you and surviving, it's not like it's something we could really avoid in any major capacity.
No.
Parasites are just everywhere.
Yes.
But there are those that serve no benefit to humanity and are just through and through freeloading 30-day-old parasites living in their host's basement. These ones completely suck, and as a result, your body does have ways of dealing with these, although not always effectively. Also, if you want to know something interesting, mosquitoes have no purpose. We could actually develop, and we are developing, a way to get rid of them.
Actually, I would need to contact our resident fancy arachnologist person, Miko. I would have to talk to her about this because she has further insight on this than I do. And mosquitoes, from my understanding, at least from speaking with an arachnologist, trying to remember the subject, do have uses in certain situations in terms of the food chain, in terms of what they do. I take professional contention with this. Not saying Roanoke's an idiot by any means. No. I'm saying that I have heard otherwise and would have to research this further to come to a fully factual conclusion. Actually, let me see if I can clip that, or can someone else clip that? That way I can send that to Miko, because I really want to talk to her about that. Thank you for clipping it in advance.
Mosquitoes that then would get rid of a bunch of parasites because the parasites are dead-end species and there's nothing that they do that helps the ecosystem. So, hey, maybe one day there won't be any actual mosquitoes left on Earth, which would be amazing. But then again, what happens to the mosquito eaters? I guess they'll eat other bugs. It doesn't really matter. But when a parasite enters your body, your immune system becomes aware of it fairly quickly due to the fact that on its surface, it's not presenting markers that designate it as self. When this happens, the body begins reacting pretty quickly, which triggers an immunoglobulin E response, which utilizes antibodies and is just a more complicated term for an allergic response.
Right.
Inflammation, itching, increasing blood flow to the site, all the classics.
Yep.
IgE will then bond to Fc receptors on leukocytes such as eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. The big one we will talk about is eosinophils, but they all play their part in degranulation and cytokine release. So let's start with the humble mast cells, shall we? The mast cells play an important role in things like intestinal parasites and worms that, get into your intestines. Mast cells release proteases that are found to be severely toxic to certain types of parasites, rendering them essentially poisoned and disabled by breaking down proteins and polypeptides from that parasite. At that point, the mast cells will then induce what is known as hyperplasia. This is basically an increase in mucus secretion that the disabled parasites are then caught up in, and then it's forced out of your body, leading to a decrease in overall parasitic infection. The basophils have another method of cutting down the numbers of invaders in your system by working with other immune cells. Once antigen stimulation has happened, basophils will secrete what is known as IL-4 to get macrophages on site. Proteases are then secreted as well, which again does basically what it needs to, but it will also recruit monocytes, neutrophils, and eosinophils to the infection site to begin the process of cleanup. Basophils' job essentially is to kick off the process of type 2 immunity. But hold on, what is type 2 immunity? Well, let's start that question off by answering what is type 1 immunity. Type 1 immunity is essentially the defense against intracellular pathogens like bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms, whereas type 2 promotes the immunity against extracellular parasites and helminths, and also maintains homeostasis and regulates tissue repair following an injury. It's basically all a part of the same process, but different phases. You can kind of think of it like that. And type 3 immunity is when cytokines get released, and is particularly effective at controlling infections caused by specific bacteria. And now we get to the absolute chad of an immune cell. When it comes to the immune response, the eosinophils. It's sort of like that friend in a bar fight that punches themselves in the face to get amped up before going after the actual problem. Eosinophils play the role of moving to the area and destroying whatever is flagged for destruction. While they can undergo phagocytosis, which basically means to engulf, they are more effective at releasing an extremely potent mediator that cuts open the parasite, spilling its contents into the surrounding area. Essentially, eosinophils will eviscerate parasites. It's pretty metal. However, these same mediators can also damage the surrounding tissue in some respects, hence the punching yourself in the face. This specific
it's a hammer versus a scalpel. It's going to damage an AoE area versus a precise incision.
Cell is also responsible for destroying allergens that get into the body, as well as they can take on cancer cells that aren't listening to undergo apoptosis. They will remind the cancer cell that it wasn't asking for it to destroy itself, it was telling it to.
Wasn't asking
Gotta love
you.
eosinophils. But again, the downside there is that sometimes collateral damage is associated with the cell's activation. But you should see how many of your cells end up just getting bodied after you have a fever. It's literally millions.
I believe it.
All of these come together to give you a form of immunity against parasites, but the issue is, even with all of this, it's still not 100% guaranteed that you will clear the infection. It may take the outside intervention of basically humanity in a lot of ways to get the job done. It should be noted that there are a ton of immunological cells involved in this process to deal with parasites, but at some point, we got to get back to the actual Las Plagas, so this is a very just basic way of explaining it. Which, let's do that right now, because it shows why the infection is impossible for your body to clear. As the Las Plagas egg hatches and moves to the spinal cord, this presents an interesting challenge to your body that it will not overcome, unfortunately. The immune system is supposed to be terrified of the nervous system. Some may even say, nervous of it.
Got him!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, I guess that's like a step down from terrified, but anything for a pun. The reason for this is because if the immune system treated the nervous system infection like it treats other areas in the body that are infected, this would lead to damage to the host in a way that you may not recover from. That could.
Give me a second, Miguel. I'm reading that. Endosymbiotic hypothesis of what you were talking about. It suggests that mitochondria and chloroplasts are descended from specialized bacteria from the past that somehow survived endocytosis by ancient eukaryotic host cells. We would also had to search for it to get the term correctly. Yes, thank you. Endosymbiotic hypothesis. If someone has a paper on that, I'd be very interested to read it, as well as any factual findings on that.
Could result
Thank you for
in the
that.
end because it makes you less viable for your environment, thus ruining your chances of reproduction if you haven't reproduced yet, and that's just not going to be helpful for anybody. So, because of this immune response in the immune privileged sites, such as the brain, spinal cord, eyes, and to a degree the gonads, also your fat is immune privileged, because
Huh.
there's just not a lot of blood flow to it.
Fair.
Infections may be allowed to persist in these areas because the immune system cannot hit with everything it has. In fact, the brain-eating amoeba, Naegleria fowleri, which I have a hyperfixation on whenever I go to the lake where it lives,
Yeah.
is one of those things that the immune system just cannot get a grasp on because it's essentially wearing boxing gloves to a knife fight. Also, 2 things before moving on. Autoimmune issues can have the immune system attack the nervous system. That's absolutely possible. We see it all the time. It's horrible. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to fix that. But Naegleria fowleri also gets up your nose when you jump into lake water with the
Yep.
sediment at the bottom having
Yep.
been disturbed.
Yep.
So plug your nose before jumping into any natural body of water, and also
Mm-hmm.
maybe even pools, because you need to have them essentially chlorinated so that it can destroy amoebas like that. Or
Yep.
if it's a saltwater pool, the salt has to be at the correct level. So just
pH.
heads up on that.
No, wait,
Anyhow,
not pH. Excuse me.
when the amoeba enters the nose, it follows up to the exposed nervous tissue high up into the nose, drawn in by the communication of those cells. Once entering this area, neutrophils would be dispatched, but too many of the amoebas will make it through, where they will start eating neuronal tissue of the brain. This causes your immune system to completely freak out as the meninges then swell, putting pressure on the brain, causing brain damage and ultimately death, unfortunately.
Your brain is also incredibly weird because of, and you actually deal with, I believe you deal with this in terms of mad cow and prions in the brain, right? There's a lot. If something gets in the brain, it's incredibly hard to get at from your immune system because the blood-brain barrier exists. I am a little undereducated on it, but I know it does play a big factor in terms of brain infections and stuff that's affecting your brain, right? Whether it be prions, whether it be external, what have you. The blood-brain barrier is definitely a barrier, quote unquote, to entry, if you will.
One person I think to date has been spared this fate due to the timing that they got to the hospital.
Good shit.
A ton of medications, one of those being experimental.
Wow.
Most arrived way too late. Actually, everybody except that one person have arrived too late.
Wow.
If you get a stiff neck after you go to the lake, immediately go to the hospital.
That's huge.
The reason the amoeba cannot be effectively cleared is because the immune system's effectiveness near the nervous system, whether that be central or peripheral, is just completely downgraded. And this is exactly what the Las Plagas is banking on.
Fair.
Being that it is attached to your nervous system, the immune response to it would be extremely limited, which it's then able to hold at bay rather easily as it's larger.
I would say that this might be a tapeworm. This looks like it's moving through your intestines with all these little, I can't remember what they're called. It's not Feely. I can't remember what they're called. But this looks like it'd be intestinal.
Normal as well. Then it continues to grow, and this will be incredibly painful for the host, given the pressure that it is putting on the spinal cord,
Right.
as well as the integration process into the spinal cord that likely isn't all that wonderful either. This will result in inflammation responses all over the body as the immune system sends out chemical messengers, which leads to blood vessel inflammation, most notably in the eyes, then convulsions and hallucinations. For younger individuals, this infection process is usually lethal, which is why you see no younglings in the village itself. Adults
Aw.
seem to be the only one who can survive the infection process, if you can call it that. But as soon as the Plagas breaks out of its egg and begins altering the host in some pretty significant ways, it's basically over for them anyways. Eventually, as the Plagas continues to grow, it will be able to exit the body after the head has become a lost cause, and this is known as Plaga A, B, and C.
So Gotcha says in chat, drastically simplified, but if you cut the corpus callosum, there we go, I almost said coliseum, the thing that branches the two brain hemispheres, it can resolve certain kinds of seizures from happening, the only side effect being certain information can only be shared between the two hemispheres. Yes, the brain is fucking weird. One, I don't know, people find it weird, I don't find it weird, the brain named itself, I don't know, it's not super weird to me, it just happened. Also, there is, anytime you deal with the brain, whether you deal with it in terms of lobotomies, head trauma, cranial trauma, parts of your brain potentially going missing due to trauma events, etc. Especially the older you are, the more impact it can have on you. I think it was a Roanoke video. I think we looked at the slasher video actually for it. Roanoke had mentioned a gentleman who had a railroad spike through his head, and he just wasn't the same afterwards. He was prone to bouts of anger, stuff like that. That being said, we've definitely seen there was some kid at some point in medical history that ended up having to lose half his brain, but because of his age, his brain was able to rewire itself, and he functioned perfectly fine on half a brain. if the story holds, and if this is, factual, once again, it's hearsay, please do your research. The older you get, as the brain gets more set in its ways, it gets harder to reroute those pathways and stuff. Always goes immune response to the brain swelling, and the brain cranium is the way in the way swelling. Yep. Your skull, for all intents and purposes, is pretty hard, boneheaded, if you will, thick, if you will, as well. If your brain swells too much, it can cause other issues, because think about it, your skull does not move, right? It's not malleable, unlike infant skulls, right, where they're a little malleable. There's actually a little hole on the top of that, if I remember correctly, because cartilage hasn't grown over it, which. Do not poke infants in the head. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, no. I mean, if your brain swells up too much, I mean, it's gonna put outwards pressure, but your skull's not gonna move. Thus, you're gonna run into issues. Neuroplasticity. Yes, that is correct. Since brain tissue is more malleable, and yep. Neuroplasticity is the word. Thank you for that. I thought if your brain was fucky. Yeah, we don't talk about electroshock therapy. 2 brains inside you. I'll have to look at that at some point. That sounds interesting.
Plaga A is a standard tentacle variant that will come out at night and has a large scythe that it will use to lash out.
Scythe is made of bone.
Any individual that is not infected. This scythe is razor sharp and made of bone.
Got him.
The fragile bones in another human's neck. It can easily result in their head rolling off of their shoulders with very little effort.
Yep.
This variant shows us that it's likely coiled around the spinal column of the person infected with the standard version of Plaga. It may also indicate timing, as this version seems less developed than the other two, which comes down to how long it's been altering and adapting host tissue for its use.
More shock symbol.
Plaga B are in my
do not do without medical
opinion,
professional help, though.
Horrifying.
Yes.
Coming out like a worm,
Thick.
they possess a large singular mouth in the middle of its body. Arm-like extremities flank either side of it, where it grabs onto you, and then it can see what your head tastes like. But I also break away for a moment to tell you that your fingers are just little arms at the end of your arms. The top knuckle is the shoulder. The middle knuckle is the elbow.
I need you to stop. We're getting way too meta, Roanoke.
And the bottom knuckle is your wrist. You're
What?
welcome for that.
What?
This version of Plaga appears to be the most developed in terms of volume and appears to require the most host tissue to form itself, being several feet in length.
Yeah.
However, I would say it spent the second most amount of time in the body because it's not able to detach itself fully from the host.
Nope.
Meaning it is still not viable on
That's
its
the
own
type
as an
C.
individual. The last Plaga, Plaga C, is the most hated because it uses the most ammo.
Bro, like the type, I think the type C takes less ammo than the type B, especially on like hardcore. Like, they're thick. The type C's go down pretty easy. That's just me. That's my experience. I'd have to actually see the health pools. No, the C's are more, I would say, chitinous, right? Very spider-like. They can skid around walls, and they also just wrap themselves on and around unsuspecting people to just pilot them. Like, they got buffed in the remake. It's wild.
After it exits from a person's neck, if the body becomes a lost cause to it, it will then detach from the spinal cord entirely and run away and attack a few more times, trying to subdue its attacker. Seeing that it is fully formed and able to move on its own, this appears to be a form of Plaga that is meant to lay eggs somewhere and continue on the line.
Correct me, and absolutely.
It's required to remain within the host to be able to survive. Its body is lithe and built like a spider, making it worse as its legs have become long and spindly. Prior to the event...
The fuck you mean worse? To be fair, Roanoke, if for some reason you watch this, to be fair, I also have PhD arachnologist friends, so like I actually have like an affinity for spiders and vinegaroons and stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm also just weird. I'm built different, if you will, built dingus.
Evacuation of humans to these creatures, however, the changes to the body will exist to further the parasite's ability to survive.
I can see the hilarity
of
them.
It has nothing to do
yeah.
with saving the human body. You're basically just a meat taxi that then adds armor plating to by making you not feel things.
Yep.
Why would you ever think that's the way forward? Those infected can be hit with lead several times, stabbed, and also just hit really hard in general, and will still remain functional, likely because the parasite itself is blocking pain
That
signals
knife would be really
by
hot.
reaching the brain early on. On top of this, considering it's made out of tentacles, it may also bolster broken bones by then holding them together.
Yep.
So as a result of this interference, the Plagas will also increase the strength of humans by amplifying the signals to the muscles to attack and then remove the brain block.
So I need to see actually the big ones. I'm curious if that's like a head someone has fit, like a cow head that someone has fitted over them. Or, and hear me out on this, chat, because clearly we've seen Plaga that have burst out through the cranial, through the neck cavity, right, and become type A, B, and even C, right? I'm curious if a Plaga has burst out, shown as ABC, right, burst out of the neck slot, if maybe it took a decapitated bovine head, or even like goat head, whatever head, and maybe that's why it's rolling around, right? Boar's head, that too, right? Yeah. So I'm curious, because if the Plaga pops out of the head, right, there's not exactly a way to really get that back in there safely. I mean, the type C, right? I call type 3, but type C, right? It just kind of skitters off, does its own thing. However, I'm curious if the decapitated boar's head, etc., they could snake into that and then, retract, recoil into the host body. That way, it would make sense to me. Like, you get what I'm trying to say, right? Or the village put the animal head. Yeah, it could also be that as well. I'm very curious to hear more about the morphology of the big ones. Very curious.
It tones down natural human strength. Because, again, the human body is just a host. And the
Those
parasite
guys,
likely
yep.
has no intention of staying permanently, so why protect the
Oh,
host?
look at a model of
Measure.
one.
Exactly. You
There's
wouldn't.
ropes on it,
The
too.
body's totally expendable. The Plagas itself are also interesting because they behave sort of like a colony of ants would concerning hierarchy.
Yep.
There are different lines in dominant Plaga that will result in different lines, but we also see that with ants when a new queen is born. She will leave the colony and then go form another line somewhere else.
Ant.
This social ability is rather interesting. I'm not really sure if I want to call it eusocial because they don't appear to take care of any brood collectively, it seems. I mean, it's maybe they do, but also humans
I'll
are a
flip the
main
damage
portion
numbers.
of infecting others. I mean, naturally they would be infecting others. I just don't know if they're really taking care of each other, so it's not exactly eusocial. But, I mean, humans do influence the parasites as well. So this leads to different lines that may not want to cooperate either. Mendez regards how they share the same blood, but he will end Leon if necessary regardless of the Plagas infection, meaning that the parasite in Mendez won't hesitate to destroy the parasite in Leon.
No, because free will still exists at that
El
stage.
Gigante, remember what I called it years ago? Again, oh my god. Anyways, it will literally crush other infected hosts before going after Leon. It's not the mind of El Gigante, it's the line of parasite.
Yep.
Regardless, the queen disperses the eggs, and the eggs get into the human form, but supposedly even controlling them like meat mechs, the human is still in there for a time, but will be changed as time progresses. The parasites do have a form of communication, which is integral to showing the devolving of the human control over the body. When confronted by a Leon, they will form a pack mentality, which may be full parasite, but it's also still a very human trait. They communicate specifically by ultra-high frequency sound waves, where if there's no dominant Plaga giving the order, they will just group up and deal with the issue.
Yep.
They're able to communicate
They'll have
by
some
specialized
autonomy.
organs inside of their body that is able to penetrate the human tissue and then get to them. But higher up the chain, the dominant individual can also send out commands to do specific tasks using this frequency, which the subordinate Plaga will then comply, and whether that be attack a house or come to church when the bell tolls. At this point, the human aspect is not completely, it's mostly gone, and the Plaga have most of the control. Outside of the 100% taking over portion, the person is still there, but their perception and mind will be warped over time. And this is actually seen when Leon sees a pot of rotting meat later on in his infection process and remarks how he could go for a steak. The Plagas is starting to reach his mind at this point and alter how he thinks through chemical communication.
Oh, I always took that as a joke. In the original, at least, it came across... in the island, right? The dirty-ass kitchen. How Leon's like, man, I could go for a steak, seeing all the rotten meat and stuff like that. I always took that as a joke, but this is actually a very interesting analysis because, yeah, he is shifting at that point. The Plaga is growing, and it's definitely... it's maturing. I mean, Yeah, that could be interpreted that way. Yeah, I could see that.
This process in the later stages will result in the brain being somewhat functional, but now is basically just puppeted by the Plagas.
Yep.
Which I would have to assume at this point brain damage has also begun mounting.
Yes.
So they are easily controlled. Also, another thing that will happen once the Plagas enter the body is the eyes will begin turning red, which seems to suggest maybe there's a type of bioluminescence that is released by the parasite as it continues to infect the body, though this is still unknown. So, to wrap this thing up, there is one major flaw of the parasite, which is shown early on with Leon, but he would be unsure of how to interpret that.
Yeah.
At night, the parasite can then exit the body of its own free will by destroying the head and assumingly possibly reforming in the morning.
But it's
we know the
photosensitive.
parasite can induce mutations like it did with Mendez.
That is true.
But we don't know if they go back to their original form.
I
Although
couldn't
it is
see it.
suggested when Lady Dimitrescu changed one time before, she was able to go back into her original form, although this is not the Las Plagas.
No, that's the Megamycete, which is a completely different thing altogether, and I feel is more fungal, right? If I remember correctly. Resident Evil Village in 7, that was more fungal. No, sorry, it was a mold. Where does that fall? Is mold a fungus? Mold is a fungal growth, so I was correct, actually, on the first try. It is a fungal growth at that. And they do function in separate ways. It's a hard comparison, but I see it being made. I don't think anything the Megamycete does can be indicative of what Las Plagas does. If that makes sense. Am I making sense, chat?
And that is something else entirely. It just seems like maybe...
I need to play Village again.
People can go back to their original form. Anyways. Having your head destroyed every night. What a life. So UV radiation will absolutely body a Plagas, which in turn would suggest that they may have come from the caves themselves and are a troglodytic species existing within the dark zone of caves, never being exposed to light. As a result, they never adapted to the radiation, which in turn can lead them to be burned away if they are exposed to it. This is advantageous, as there's no way to remove the Las Plagas from the host without paralysis of the host or their complete end. By using UV...
The paralysis is specifically from one of the movies. I don't remember which movie it is. It's one of the ones in, like, the Ukrainian area, I think it was, right? God, it had 8. I cannot remember the name of the movie to save my life. But at the end, the dude had been infected with a Las Plagas and was starting to lose himself, but Leon ended up shooting in the middle of the chest and paralyzed him. The end of the movie is him in a wheelchair just strolling on, you know, not in a war-torn country anymore, being able to be a teacher and live in peace. That's where that one's coming from specifically.
UV light within the body. This can destroy the parasite, letting your body break down the carcass over time without damaging your nervous system, although it's probably going to give your lungs and heart a sunburn. There are medications that can slow down the growth of the parasite and give you more time to clear the infection by a medical procedure, but this isn't a cure, it's just time measure. However, if the eggs are unhatched and the medication is administered, this can stop it entirely and then take out the eggs.
Neutralizes it.
This suggests the parasite hatches and grows, and because it's literally altering your biochemistry, it would then be using your tissue to protect itself and make sure that the medication does not reach, at least in any lethal amount that could take it out.
Interesting.
The Las Plagas is a form of parasite that can reach into your head, likely with its tentacles, and begin altering the very way you think about the world around you. As the infection process
it's really good metal.
This would ultimately result in your end, as
it
your
didn't
body
snap.
would not be able to counter the parasite due to the size of the creature and the location of the attachment point. Anyone who thinks that this would be a great thing for humanity in general is definitely a huge nerd and probably named Sadler. I think this guy must have already been infected or something from the drop, because there's literally zero power to be gained here. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great. Subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on what I post. So I had I had an unfortunate event pop up recently that may require me to go out of town. I'm not really certain if there will be another video next week or not, but I will see what I can do, just no promises. Regardless of that, I will drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link in the description if you guys want to check that out. It is a channel where I cover real-life horror stuff, and it is becoming a debunking channel.
It is.
Just because it's
I've
like
seen
some
an
things are
episode.
just so absolutely ridiculous. It's like this isn't real, and it's able to be easily debunked with actual facts. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to talk about horror, but I cannot ignore when something's just blatantly wrong. Anyways, speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank those bros real quick. First, huge thank you as always to our astronaut, Wesley A. Weaver Jr. Thank you for your continued support, my man. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, as well as our scientists, Countryside Limbo, Lacune, and Logan.
I had to send that to Miko.
Thank you guys for your support as well. And to the rest of my patrons, you guys are greatly appreciated, and I thank you for sticking around and helping out this channel. All right, so that does it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.
But, guys, we didn't start with we didn't start with the feet. We didn't start with the feet. I'm left unfulfilled. Thank you, Roanoke, for an absolutely great video. 100%. Loved it. Keep up the great work. And hope everything with your personal shit goes well. Hope everything is well. And hope you have a good one, Roanoke.